Hi, I'm Ross Tieman. I'm a researcher at Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters, or ORFED, and today I'll be talking to you a bit about the term digital fragility, but basically how implementation of digital tools within critical infrastructure may be introducing risks of catastrophic risks. Just a quick heads up, I had a technical issue with my speaking notes, but I'll move through it as best as I can. So industrial civilization allows the production of mass goods we all rely on to live. So this is food, water, shelter. It does this extremely efficiently. And in order to do this, relies on various infrastructures such as electricity, fuel, communications, transportation, and finance. To add as one point on how much we rely on industrial infrastructure and industrial processes, the Haber-Bosch process currently produces nitrogen fertilizers that allow increased yields, which feed 40% of the world's population. So in the event of a failure of these critical infrastructures, which allow the production of these goods, we would have significant harms caused to humanity. And depending on whether or not this could be recovered quickly, these could have long-term impacts as well. There is work being done presently to address these issues of infrastructure failures. We see in July 2021, the Biden administration signing work to minimize cyber risks. However, there is still a lot to be done. Specifically, we've been looking at how the digital transformation or how digital tools are being implemented in society and specifically within critical infrastructure may change the nature of this risk. So we see things along the lines of increasing standardization of tools when we implement integrated circuits more so in critical infrastructure, as well as increased interconnectivity between infrastructure. So how does this impact the resilience of infrastructure and the potential risk of failures? Well, we see that as there's an increasing interconnection, there may be the chance for larger cascading failures, and increased standardization means that initial stresses might have a greater impact. In general, this means large cascading failures may be possible, and this might be a systemic catastrophic risk. To investigate this more, we started to look through several scenario analysis. So we looked at cyber attacks and also high altitude electromagnetic pulse. The example here, I won't go into too much detail, but we worked through how this might percolate through the system and the role digital might have. So we see a HEMP impacts components within critical infrastructure, such as supervisory control and data acquisition devices, which in turn can then impact the electrical grid and gas supply. And we also see that increasingly SCADA systems are relying more on the ICT components themselves to communicate. So these failures can be greater. Additionally, the potential for positive feedback loops to emerge seems to be larger as we have failures of gas supply, which can then lead to a reduction in available electricity production, which can then feed back again into less gas supply. Beyond looking at this initially through the scenario analysis, we can attempt to quantify these failures and the role that digital plays within this. To do this, we took the Huff et al. Model, which looked at the US food system, and we've attempted to feed in the infrastructures that feed the US food system. So you can see internet, fuel, electricity, water, and transportation, and begin to work out how much digitization or digital tools are used within this. So we refer to this as the technical factor as well as the human production factor. From this, we hope to look at how much of a loss we might see under different levels of digitization within these different infrastructures, such that we can begin to bound the scale of the problem. So this is the start of an extended period of work we're going to do. Next, we would like to move on to developing some network models of electricity infrastructure and then how digital components within that might cause larger failures. This would require empirical data on the diversity and connectivity of SCADA systems within these components, so we can look at how the degree of interconnectivity within these SCADA systems can bound or increase larger failures. Additionally, looking into policies and interventions that might improve the recovery. So a backup communication system can increase the speed at which we can recover infrastructure, which then reduces the harm done as well as the likelihood of longer failures. And finally, providing basic needs throughout failure of infrastructure so that people can be provided for throughout the recovery. Additionally, further research into several aspects discussed. So as mentioned previously, I will be available on Discord, and I can be contacted at www.olfed.info/Ross if you wish to discuss any of the topics throughout this talk. Thank you very much for listening. And now, any questions?
Wonderful. Well done, Ross. That was 5 minutes and 30 seconds. So in under the mark, I didn't even have to raise my yellow flag. Okay, great. So we've got some, hopefully we'll have some questions in the room. Does anybody have an immediate question? Yeah, at the back. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Ross. The obvious question that came to me was, have you taken into account what happened in Iraq when the US cut off a lot of infrastructure, either deliberately or accidentally? Was that a good sort of research area for you, or not?
As in the scale of failure? We didn't look at that scenario initially, no. We had focused more so on the recent Texas power grid failure, as well as looking at some of the cyber attacks like the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, as well as Stuxnet, and how that percolated through critical infrastructures.
Thanks.
I was just wondering if you could go in to a bit more detail, what sort of resilience strategies that you've been thinking about for this type of hazard. In terms, does this go along with a similar kind of resilience as the other kind of all-fed techniques, or is this a little bit different?
Yeah, so we were interacting with two of the other involved researchers that have an information systems background. So ways we could look at this too are how you could be more proactive and look at, say, implementing more modularity within critical infrastructures, or within at least the digital components that are involved in that. Or, as I mentioned previously, we can look at, say, what the diversity of different SCADA systems or the connectivity within them are, because they might introduce properties within the overall infrastructure network which make them more resilient and prevent like as long a cascade of failures. I guess this is more so from a theoretical aspect, as well as simply the recovery component, which Olfed has done more of, which would be sort of in the instance like the radio backup network as an intervention.
I had a question as well, actually. So some colleagues led by Asaf Shakur have done some work on the risks and benefits of incorporating AI into agriculture, and were kind of surprised that there hadn't been a lot or written already, not a lot of research been done on this, on the kind of digital vulnerabilities in our food system. And I was just wondering what your experience has been in looking at different papers and literature written on it. Have you been surprised, or what's your sense of how much work has been done on this area?
Yeah, I think in general that it's potentially being somewhat overlooked at present. Just if you think that there's integrated circuits being used more diversely, and there's vulnerabilities to sort of electromagnetic pulses, you could see large chunks being impacted. So in general, there's been some good work on the EMP component itself, but I think if you zoom out and look at the trends of what's being implemented and how there's more to be done, and especially if we're going to implement these like sort of like AI-driven agricultural systems, that might be a huge amount of production which is dependent on these, and if we don't know how resilient they are, that could be a large point of failure.